So the next disease we're going to cover is known as al-Baghy, which means oppression. And this disease is very, very simple for us to understand. Baghy is when you cause hurt for no valid reason whatsoever. Could be to other people, could be to animals, could be to yourself. If you find that you cause harm for no valid reason, then you have the disease of Baghy, and its consequences are severe. One time the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he was speaking to his companions, and he told them of a story of a woman who had this disease of Baghy. And he said, دَخَلَتِ امْرَأَةٌ النَّارِ, a woman entered the hellfire. Why? Because she had a kitten. And this kitten, she used to tie it up inside and never ever feed it. And she would never allow this kitten to go outside and eat from the insects of the floor, essentially, until it died of starvation and weakness. And so this woman entered the hellfire because of that. And this is a demonstration of what Baghy is. And so, as you can see, the consequences are very severe in that it can even take you to the hellfire. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also tells us in the Quran of how the Jews at the time of the Prophet ﷺ also had the disease of Baghy. Before Islam was revealed, the Jews, they knew that a prophet was coming very, very soon because it's mentioned in their scriptures. And so when the Prophet ﷺ was finally given revelation and he became a prophet, the Jews knew that he was telling the truth. They knew that the Quran that he was reciting was from Allah. But because the Prophet ﷺ was an Arab and not from their lineage, not from the Jews, they rejected him. And that's why Allah says in the Quran, فَلَمَّا جَاءَهُمْ مَا عَرَفُوا كَفَرُوا بِهِ. When there came to them a book from Allah, meaning the Quran, which they recognize as the truth, they rejected it. Allah documented this in the Quran. And in the next verse, Allah describes their action of rejecting the Quran as Baghy. بِئْسَ مَا اشْتَرَوْا بِهِ أَنفُسَهُمْ أَن يَكْفُرُوا بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ بَغْيًا. Comes from Baghy. Miserable is the price that the Jews have sold their souls for. They rejected Allah's revelation out of Baghy, oppression. Why? For granting his favor, meaning the revelation to whoever he wills of his servants, meaning the Prophet ﷺ, who was an Arab and not a Jew. And so as you can see, the Jews had Baghy against their own selves. And just like the woman with the cat, what are the consequences for the Jews? Allah tells us in the rest of the verse, and he says, فَبَاءُوا بِغَضَبٍ عَلَى غَضَبٍ وَلِلْكَافِرِينَ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ. They've earned wrath upon wrath, and these disbelievers will suffer a humiliating punishment. And so the punishment of Baghy manifests in the next life, but it can also manifest in this dunya as well. And so to the one who has this disease of oppression, this disease of Baghy, know that when you oppress, you're actually oppressing yourself, because there will come a time where all of that oppression backfires on you. As Allah says, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ إِنَّمَا بَغْيُكُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ. O humanity, your oppression, your Baghy, is against your own selves. So now that you guys understand this disease very well, what are some modern day examples that I can give you that will help you to know if you have this disease? I'm going to share with you a personal experience to start with, inshallah. Not many people know, but I was actually born and raised in a little town in the UK called Grimsby. Yes, it was very, very grim, and it's near one of the sisters in the Zoom call right now. I can see her smiling. She knows how grim it is. In fact, it was rated by the UK somehow, one of the news outlets, as the worst place to live in the UK. Literally. And there's a reason for that. And of the reasons is that you find a lot of Baghy there, right? And there's specific areas in Grimsby which are known to be rough. And in these areas, teenagers would gather and they dress up like roadmen. They put like their hoods up, all black. Some of them wear masks, etc. You know how it is. And they bring some eggs with them, you see? And they're known to just throw eggs at cars, literally on the windshield, and it splats on the windscreen and it blocks the view from the driver. So he has to stop, get out of the car, wipe all the egg juice off, and then drive away. And they just sit there and they laugh. They literally just sit there and they laugh. And they do that pretty much every day. And not only that, these same kids, they go around and they scratch cars for no reason. These cars belong to people they don't even know, and they're just scratching them for no reason, just causing harm for no reason. And then they go to shop fronts, and then they spray paint them and sometimes break the glass, all for no reason. This is all examples of Baghy. But what are some examples that even Muslims fall into? Because I don't think any of you guys are going around egging people's cars, or at least I hope not anyway. Some examples that even Muslims fall into, which are very common, is between husband and wife. Now, sometimes the wife, maybe sometimes even the husband as well, they wake up and they choose violence. Everything is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong between them at all. But they decide, you know what, today I want to create an argument for no reason. And so they have a mad argument and they end up hurting the other person. Why? For no reason. Just because they felt like starting an argument for no reason. Just because they felt like it. This would be an example of Baghy. Another example is parents with their children. Many times you find parents know just how powerful their rights are over their children, and so they abuse these rights by pretty much enslaving their children. They overburden them with tasks. They constrict their lives, thinking that they're not going to be punished for their actions. But this is an example of Baghy. Another example is when parents refuse their children to marry someone that their children like. This is so common. And what are the reasons that they give? Because they themselves, the parents, did not choose the person that they're interested in, so they reject for that reason. They feel like that, I didn't choose them for my kids, so I can't accept them. And so they reject for that reason. Or they reject because that person is not from the same country as them, which I literally, if you open my DMs, it's flooded with people saying, please help. I can't marry such and such person because he's not from my country, etc. None of these are valid reasons to reject someone. And because they're hurting their children with no valid reason by denying their right to marriage, this would be an example of Baghy. Another example is if you ask someone to lend you money, but you know full well that you're not going to pay them back and that you're going to steal them. This would be Baghy. Another example is if you're a world leader, and just because you have the power, you cause corruption, just because you can. Just like Fir'aun did with his people. I think we can all agree, especially in today's political climate, that there's many Fir'auns in the world today that have this disease of Baghy, correct? And so these examples should give you enough idea as to what this disease is and whether or not you have it. But with everything that I've said, are there any valid reasons where you can cause hurt to other people? Because I've said that Baghy is when you hurt people with no valid reason. So are there any valid reasons? Yes, there is only one. If someone hurts you, then you can hurt them back the same way they hurt you, but no more than that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, فَمَنِ اعْتَدَى عَلَيْكُمْ فَاعْتَدُوا عَلَيْهِ بِمِثْلِ مَا اعْتَدَى عَلَيْكُمْ. If anyone attacks you, then you can retaliate in the same manner. So if someone swears at you, yes, you're allowed to swear at them back. If someone hits you, yes, you're allowed to hit them back, but no more than they did it to you. This retaliation is perfectly fine in Islam. But I want to play Shaitan's advocate because I don't want you guys to go crazy, because sometimes someone might steal from you. Does that mean you can steal from them? Someone might cheat from you. Does that mean you can cheat them? No. Let me make it very clear. If the action in and of itself is haram, so for example, stealing is haram, cheating is haram. If the action in and of itself is haram, then you can't. Whereas when it comes to something like swearing or hitting, these actions are not always haram depending on the situation. But if something is clear-cut haram like zina or stealing or cheating, then you cannot return that hurt by doing the same thing. Because that action in and of itself is haram, and doing the haram is always haram, right? And so as you can see, even in retaliation, Islam provides limits. And that's why in the rest of the verse that I mentioned before, فَمَنِ اعْتَدَى عَلَيْكُمْ فَاعْتَدُوا عَلَيْهِ بِمِثْلِ مَا اعْتَدَى عَلَيْكُمْ. If anyone attacks you, then you can retaliate in the same manner. Allah finishes the verse by saying, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهِ وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الْمُتَّقِينَ. Be mindful of Allah and know that Allah is with those who are mindful of Him. Because sticking to these limits, sticking to these parameters, if you like, it requires us to be mindful of Allah. Sometimes it can be very difficult to stay within the boundary if someone swears at you or insults you or even hits you as well. So you have to always be mindful of Allah when you retaliate. But one thing that needs to be mentioned is that just because revenge or retaliation is allowed in Islam doesn't mean that's what's best to do. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَن تَعْفُوا أَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى. Forgiveness is closer to taqwa, closer to righteousness. So definitely, leaving those who do baghi to you and not sinking to their level, as they say, is generally better for you in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so to summarize, baghi or oppression is a disease where you cause harm for no valid reason, whether that be to other people, to yourself, or even to animals as well. And the only valid reason where you can hurt other people is when you retaliate to other people hurting you. And the conditions are that you can only return the hurt the same amount that they hurt you And the action that they did to you isn't something that is clear-cut haram for you to do it back to them. And of course, to forgive is generally better and to not retaliate, essentially. And so now with all of that, we are ready to go into the cures, and there's literally just one cure. The cure is to realize that the consequences of your oppression may not be seen in this life, but it will definitely be seen in the next life, in the akhirah. And sometimes that consequence, just like the woman with the cat, can be as severe as entering the hellfire. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, "Inna dhulma dhulumatun yawm al-qiyamah." Verily, oppression will be darkness on the day of judgment. And darkness is the absence of goodness and comes in the form of punishment. You do not want that day to be the day where you find out the consequence of your baghy. And so before you act on your baghy, let's say you're in a situation and you feel like you want to act on your baghy, you have to realize there and then that Allah can see each and every one of your actions, and He can even hear your thoughts 24/7. وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ وَنَعْلَمُ مَا تُوَسْوِسُ بِهِ نَفْسُهُ وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبِلِ الْوَرِيدِ. Indeed, it is we, Allah is saying, it is we who created mankind, and we fully know what their souls whisper to them. Allah knows everything that's happening in your heart. And then Allah says, we are closer to them than their jugular vein, which is a vein in your neck like this, meaning that Allah is very close to you. He knows everything that's going on. And not only that, in the next verse, Allah tells us that He's appointed 2 angels for us. One on our right, one on our left. إِذْ يَتَلَقَّى الْمُتَلَقِّيَانِ عَنِ الْيَمِينِ وَعَنِ الشِّمَالِ قَعِيدٌ. The 2 recording angels, one sitting to the right, one sitting to the left, they note everything down. They're creating a record as we live our lives of all the actions that we do. And that very record, which does not leave anything big or small, is going to be presented to us on the Day of Judgment. And so this should scare us enough to know that if we do any baghy, it's going to be on that record, and so we should avoid it at all costs. And so your action point is very simple, and that is to reflect on everything that I've said in this cure every single day sincerely for a month, to know that Allah is always watching me, to know that my consequences are going to be seen in the akhirah, maybe not in this life, but definitely in the akhirah. And if you're able to memorize the verses in the hadith that I mentioned, that would be better, because next time you're about to, or you're inclined to act on your baghy, these verses straight away will come to your mind and they'll stop you in your tracks, inshaAllah ta'ala.